The only problem was all around us in this metallic, echoey building, people were dismantling their sets. And I'm sitting there talking to Rahul Dravid, and we're hearing people de-rigging, as they say, and there's this crashing and booming and thumping sounds going on, and he was looking a little bit nervous, and in the end we had to let the poor fella go.
Jeffrey Boycott, if you were 30 seconds past the 9 o'clock leave the hotel, or 8:30, whatever it was, he would take his car.
Now, ordinarily, you would see me posting content about football, whether it be Premier League, European Championships, or what have you. But some of you, maybe the slightly older among you, might remember there was a time when I actually broadcast cricket for a living. Yep, I once did. I hosted the 1999 Cricket World Cup. I covered all sorts of test tours and one-day series. And in so doing, it brought me into contact with some of the greats of the game. Players, those who coached the game, those, of course, who commentated and presented cricket. And speaking of whom, I'm delighted to say I'm joined from his home in Great Britain by Alan Wilkins, my friend and former colleague from the days at ESPN Star Sports, when cricket was a very big thing. Alan, it's great to see your face. You haven't changed at all, my friend.
It's great to talk with you again. Great to team up with you again. And thank you for the intro. Do you know, when you mentioned ESPN Star Sports, then I'm not fibbing. The hairs on the back of my neck have gone up, and I've got goose pimples because they were some of the best years, if not the best years, of my life in broadcasting. I left a career with the BBC and ITV, and I went a long way, as you did. You left England. I went to Singapore. Our base was Singapore, and we had the world at our feet. We had the world on a television screen. It was the biggest sports broadcasting network in the world. And I know that when I got there, and I got the call from, you remember Rick Dovey, who was the managing director then, Rick, and you were doing everything. You're quite right. You were doing cricket. You did the 99 Cricket World Cup. I did that for the BBC. And I did the 99 Rugby World Cup for ITV. At the end of all that year, that was one of the biggest years of my life, busiest. And then Rick said, we need a bit of an extra hand on deck. And that's why I flew to Singapore, joined you. And then, of course, I think you probably remember that chat where you and I shared an office, which was great. And I think they put the whole agenda in front of us both and said, look, we've got Formula One, we've got rugby, we've got cricket, we've got golf, we've got football. John, you can't do it all now because it's, you need help. So I think that's when you went towards football and I went more towards cricket and golf and rugby. And it was a great team.
You're absolutely right, Alan. I mean, and the lovely thing about it was we covered so many different sports, but with your background in particular as a professional cricketer, it just made so much sense. And we then picked up the Premier League. And it was when the Premier League came along that things really changed because we had wall-to-wall programming, didn't we? And that involved, overnights on Saturdays and Sundays and what have you. So I sort of moved towards football and look at me now, because that took me off wherever I went, which ended up with the Premier League in England, then coming back out to Asia with my own show talking about football. And of course, you went from strength to strength. I think a lot of people still very fondly remember your time on the tennis with Vijay Amritraj, wonderful times. But of course, it was the cricket that really defined what you did. And you're right, we had everything. But as far as cricket was concerned, we were the leaders, a few good men. It was everything to do with every aspect of the game. Tell me, Alan, what were your cricketing highlights in terms of your memories of back then? Because I was blessed that I worked on a World Cup with Sunil Gavaskar and Jeffrey Boycott and the late Tony Greig, and some wonderful personalities from the game. But you met and worked with them all, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. And John, you mentioned a few good men. A few good men. I can't remember a happier commentary box in my life. It was Sunny Gavaskar, Ravi Shastri, Jeffrey Boycott, Navjot Singh Sidhu, Harsha Bogle, and me. What an eclectic bunch that was. I mean, that came into being in 2002. But what we did, we covered the Indian cricket team wherever they went. My first tour with this team was down to South Africa in 2001. That's when Sachin, the great Sachin Tendulkar, got pulled up for doing something to the cricket ball. He was pulled up by Mike Dinesh, the ICC match referee. It was pandemonium. 2002, 2002 was the Indian tour to England, where we had that unbelievable final at Lord's, where Sourav Ganguly was waving his shirt on the balcony. That's when India pulled off a record chase of 325. We didn't have the rights to the ICC Cricket World Cup in 2003, but we still did it. And if you remember, we went down to South Africa and we did various links and things and outside the grounds. And I looked like a Dalek most of the time because I was on this satellite. I was on this satellite phone. So I think in terms of those early years, they were some of the best years of broadcasting. And you had Sidhu, the mad Sikh. You know, you had Sidhu, who was all on his own. Harsha was the scientist. Ravi was the playmaker. Sunny just played it straight, and I came along to join it all up. And so
there was so much about it that I loved, Alan. I'm going to jump in there quickly because you summarized it well. But at the same time, cricket broadcasting was going in a wonderful direction as well. Because if you think about it, everything we take for granted now in terms of all of the graphics that augment everything that we do, all of the simulations, everything that's augmented or virtual, that theorizes, you know, which direction a ball is going, that's is able to very quickly collate statistics, you know, about the length the bowler is bowling or, you know, where runs are being scored. Those things didn't exist when we first started out broadcasting. So at the same time, you had these tools coming along that you guys were able to work with as well.
It's given cricket the most scientific based approach now, and it does help commentary and it does help the viewer at home. I think we must be careful that the modern way of televising cricket, of broadcasting cricket, you know, it's very technical, but I think you must be mindful of the fact that we've got youngsters watching, young boys and girls watching cricket as well. So, you know, cricket jargon, like there's football jargon as well. I think, you know, we mustn't overcomplicate it. But, you know, you mentioned something also, I'll say this, around all our cricket, John, and you would have done hundreds of these, the programming that ESPN Star Sports put on, I'm talking about programming, you know, sitting there with Wasim Akram, and we did hour upon hour upon hour of the great cricket fast bowlers spells, you know, and somewhere in the vaults of ESPN Star Sports is some of the best archive material in the world. And
that's right.
All programs are stacked in a library, not like this, but I hope it's digital now. And I really feel that some of that programming could be reviewed and, you know, shown again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to get into the thing, you know, we've spoken about the scientific side of things, and you're right, we produced so much programming, but along the way, there was an awful lot of fun, wasn't there? I mean, I could sit here and tell you all sorts of stories about working with football managers and football players, but just going back to my cricketing days, there's always a couple of things I remember. One of the things that sticks in my mind was doing that 99 Cricket World Cup final. Of course, it was at Lord's, and they had the media centre, which looked like a great big bowling machine, which back then was relatively new. They'd built it just in time. So we were up there broadcasting the final, which was actually a bit of a letdown. Remember, Pakistan were just steamrolled by Australia, and the game finished really early. I'll never forget sitting up there, and we had a star-studded cast. We had all of our regular pundits, and we'd brought Rahul Dravid in, Indian batting legend, who joined us just for the final to offer some punditry. And so we did the game. The game finished fairly early, but we carried on. You know what it was like in those days. We had so many sponsors that we would stay on air for hours after everybody else had gone. The only problem was all around us in this metallic, echoey building, people were dismantling their sets. And I'm sitting there talking to Rahul Dravid, and we're hearing people de-rigging, as they say. And there's this crashing and booming and thumping sounds going on, and he was looking a little bit nervous. And in the end, we had to let the poor fella go and get our sponsor stuff away. But tell me a couple of anecdotes that you'll never forget from the early days of broadcasting cricket.
Well, I mean, you talk about the hours we did. I mean, firstly, the amount of time to get to the ground, or the amount of time allocated, became longer and longer because the programming became more popular. So the sponsors came in. There was more commercial interest. So we had to get to the ground earlier. Now, trying to get Harsha Bhogle, Harsha's got one time. There's GMT, there's, you know, Greenwich Mean Time, there's Indian time, and there's Harsha time. And Harsha is the slowest of the lot. And Sourav Ganguly is even slower than Harsha to get him on time. But when they got there, I mean, Jeffrey Boycott, if you were 30 seconds past the 9 o'clock leave the hotel, or 8:30, whatever it was, he would take his car. I had been left behind in Johannesburg at the Santon Sun Hotel twice by Jeffrey because I was 30 seconds late coming down in the lift, which stopped at every floor. So that led to some extraordinary conversations. I think also, do you remember a program? You'd never get away with it now. When Wasim Akram joined our commentary team, and let's not forget that Wasim did about 6 months in Singapore learning the trade of broadcasting. I can't remember a great player ever doing that. So fair play to Waz. But we had a program called Shaz and Waz.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
And they used
saying whatever they wanted to.
Yeah, this was incredible programming. It really was. And you asked me for some stories. I mean, I'll just tell you one. On the bus, we had a mad bus, and I would drive this bus in South Africa. We did the garden route up from Cape Town to Port Elizabeth, and the only person who did not go in that bus, let me get this right, from Durban to Bloemfontein was Jeffrey Boycott. He said, I don't trust your driving at all. He said, you talk too much when you're driving. But you know what, John? I learned more in that bus about cricket, listening to Sonny, listening to Ravi. You had to listen to Sidhu because he wouldn't shut up. And they were halcyon years, John.
Absolutely brilliant. It's so amazing you should say that about Jeffrey. You know, I remember Jeffrey Boycott was such a big part of our broadcast that there were young boys and girls in India who'd get in touch with us and they'd speak in a kind of Yorkshire accent when it came to cricket and what have you. And the last thing I'll just say to that, which was hilarious, was you talked about Harsha being slow. I remember you and I playing a game of cricket once, at least once. And I think we had a sort of commentators and ex-players 11 out or something like that. And you know what I liked about him? There was nothing slow about him when he fielded close to the wicket. He was swooping in, I remember, both sides of the wicket. Quite a handy fielder was Harsha Bhogle.
Absolutely. And he bowled these little leg spinners, little leggies, Harsha. And he told, and he still tells me now, Harsha, you know, he says that when he was at university, he was IIM in Ahmedabad. He said he was a great fielder. He said that fielder got him into the side because he said batting wouldn't, and my bowling wouldn't. So it was catching. But you know, what a dear man, what a dear friend. And you know, John, you've worked with Harsha. He is so popular as a broadcaster. He understands what the public wants, and I've learned a lot from Harsha. His is one of the great success stories in the broadcasting in our era.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I love about it as well, and we've both seen it, you know, from the football side of things, there was this discussion for a long time about whether or not ex-players would be able to cross over into the more journalistic side. And there was also this fear that those who came to it from a non-playing background, like myself, you know, a non-professional player, and people like Harsha, may never be able to get in again. And I think there's a happy medium, but the suggestion has to be that you have to work at your skill or your trade. Otherwise, you won't get to the very top. And you can see that he's managed to do that. And going back to that thing you said about Wasim learning the broadcasting trade, Gary Neville, I went and interviewed Gary Neville when he was still playing, just as he was about to retire. And I realized there and then that he was going to go so far because he got the broadcasting. He understood the markets that we were broadcasting to. He made time available to us. And you know, what happened with Sky was when Sky asked him to work on their Monday Night Football, he said, that's the one with all the analysis, isn't it? And he said, I'm going to have to work at this. So what he did was he got them to send a touch screen to his home, which he worked on all summer long. He spent 2 months doing nothing but making sure he could do all of the, you know, the arrows, or the touch all the right things, use the tools, what have you. So by the time the season came around, he was so comfortable with it that wasn't going to be a problem. He could really focus on what it was he was trying to say and how he could develop his argument. Didn't surprise me at all. But that's the kind of professionalism that I think you and I appreciate. Alan, let's drag this forward a little bit right now, because the last time I saw you working on cricket was actually when I was watching Hotstar here in Singapore and watching the IPL before it all came to a halt. IPL wasn't a thing. T20 wasn't a thing back in the days that we were talking about. What has it done for cricket and for cricket broadcasting?
Well, the landscape has just changed. It's a different planet. Now, 2007, I was on tour in England with the Indian cricket team, and we all shifted. We flew not back to Singapore, but to Johannesburg. Harsha, Ravi, Sonny, myself, Sidhu didn't come, but we went to do what was then the inaugural ICC, as it was called then, World T20 in South Africa. And we thought this T20 game, what's it all about? Crash, bang, wallop. But India won it. And India beat Pakistan in that final at the Wanderers. And India were a reluctant attendee at the high table. They thought, oh, what's all this about? And the very next year, we had the first IPL. IPL has changed the planet of cricket that we all work on. It's given players and some ordinary players a change of lifestyle with the earnings that they could only have dreamt of. They've won the lottery, a lot of these players. Broadcasters, it's given them a whole new sphere and commercial interest as well. It's brought boys and girls into the game. It's a shorter game. It's a shorter format. We've all, we're all on these now. Our work is on a phone. So everything's shorter, everything's faster. And that's what T20 has done. I love it. I absolutely love T20 cricket.
Yep.
I'm privileged to work on IPL and PSL, the Pakistan Super League, which has taken off. I'd love to work in Bangladesh. And incidentally, John, that's another success story for ESPN Star Sports, is that we were the first network to go to Bangladesh back in 2001, 2002 and broadcast their cricket. But T20...
I remember, Alan, Bangladesh, I was very fond of them because, of course, they were always ICC associates when I was growing up in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong would play in them. Yes. And then, of course, Bangladesh made great strides. And I remember players like Atha Ali Khan, really, really classy players coming through and the development of them. T20, we now know. I don't think you and I need to say much about it because it's everywhere. It's covered so widely. It's in everybody's thoughts. Of course, it never goes away because there's always a T20 series attached to any major series these days. But what I've found fascinating about this is the way that we've seen India in particular develop talent. And I thought there was a time when everybody would say, T20 is T20, Test cricket is Test cricket, and never the twain shall meet. And yet you look at that Indian tour of Australia, ravaged by injuries and unavailabilities, and suddenly there was this battery of players, largely bowlers, who were able to step into the side to deliver historic Test victory. And so you can quite clearly see now that there is a synergy. I was worried for a while that bowlers were going to die a death, that no one would want to be a bowler because you're just going to get plonked all over the park if you played a shorter version of the game. It's fascinating to see how the two can sit side by side, or at least that's the way I see it. I've enjoyed some great moments in Test cricket, just as I have watching T20.
No, I agree. I agree. I think that at one stage people said, you're just a T20 cricketer, you're a Test cricketer. But I think there's now a bit more of a transfer of skills. And you're quite right. Those bowlers who went to bolster the Indian attack, and these are guys who plied their craft in the Indian Premier League, the IPL, but they did it on a Test platform and pulled off one of the most stunning Test series wins of all time. I know that you've got an England cricket team that favours white ball cricket now, that favours white ball cricket under the captaincy of Owen Morgan. I think Owen Morgan has compartmentalized his game. I still think he could have been a very, very good Test cricketer. He's got such an eye, he's got such a brain, but he's playing white ball cricket, and there's such a lot of it now that, all right, it's acceptable.
Yeah, just going back to that World Test Championship, I thought preparation and format, would have had something to do with it as well. Firstly, broadly speaking, I think if you're going to do a Test Championship for World Cricket, and it's going to take you a couple of years to get there, I don't like a one-off Test match. I think Test cricket is so subject to the environment that you play in, to circumstances that perhaps lend to it, in my opinion, being spread out over at least a 3 Test series. I think that leveled things out in terms of conditions. I know that there was a limit in terms of where they could play the thing, but trying to play anything in England, as you know, in June is always very risky weather-wise. I mean, we're talking about Wimbledon, and of course that always gets affected by it, doesn't it, as well? But what I did like about it, obviously, was the fact that New Zealand, they'd gone there, they'd prepped, in successive Test matches, they were hardened. And some of the cricket we saw was sensational. Incredible to think that in these days of incredible high-scoring IPL, how compelling was it, Alan, to see bat and ball on wickets that gave a bit of assistance, bringing out the very best skills in the bat and the bowlers. And even if there hadn't been a result, I would have found that compelling. The fact that New Zealand then did what they needed to do to get a result, very worthy champions.
Oh, 100%. It was gripping, the cricket. And I know some people might say, well, it was so slow. The batting was so slow. Yes, it was. But what was at stake was the World Test Championship Winners' Trophy, or the MACE. I agree with you. It's the viewpoint of Virat Kohli that the World Test Championship finals should be a best of three. But I think, and you touched upon it, I think in this COVID landscape and these most challenging times, to put on a best of three series right now is very difficult. I think the two tests that New Zealand played against England, and they should have won that series 2-0, not 1-0, because we had rain at Lords, was fantastic preparation. Whereas India, they were isolating in their hotel at the Aegis Bowl in Southampton. They were playing matches into squad games, which is never the same. So they will look at this, but I think it is heightened interest now, renewed interest in Test cricket, and we need that. You know, I thought Simon Doull had his comment at the end of the match when he was summing up. He said, you know, sometimes he said the nice guys do finish first. I love that comment. It was a good comment by Dooley, because New Zealand are a nice team. They got a great captain, Kane Williamson, who could end up being one of the greats of all time. But they're honest about their craft. They're diligent. They work hard. And, you know, the bowlers, look at Wagner, Bolt, Southey, and Jameson. You know, four seamers right there who were perfectly suited for that. So I hope this is a New Zealand team that we're going to see for 3-4 more years at least. But we can all learn from that. India's bowlers can learn from the way that New Zealand bowled.
Let's talk instead about the T20 World Cup. Now, that is something that we can, I think, look ahead to with an awful lot of joy. I'm seeing some nations going backwards. Sadly, I watched Sri Lanka recently. I don't think they can put up really a fight against anybody right now. But then there are some who are getting stronger and stronger at the T20 game. Who would you fancy?
Well, I do believe it's a much more level playing field looking at this ICC World T20 World Cup. You know, West Indies always come through. West Indies are a team which they love the big stage, and they know that it's in their DNA to play the short form of cricket. The Kieran Pollards of this world, you know, whether Chris Gale's going to play, wouldn't that be a farewell party? But you know, I think I'm not so sure about Australia. I'm not so sure. England are strong. Obviously, they've got so much batting. Sri Lanka, you're right. I don't see Sri Lanka being a strength. Pakistan, I do see being a real force in the ICC T20 World Cup, and Bangladesh. They fight like the Bengal Tigers, they're sometimes called. They fight and they scrap. And of course, New Zealand. So, you know, who have I left out? South Africa. You know, even they're getting their mojo back. You know, just when you thought South Africa was so far out of the door, leaving the top table of cricket, and here they've come back. I just think, John, it is such a level playing field now that you can't say, oh, it's India, it's England, Australia. No, because I think Pakistan, when you look at the talent that comes through in the PSL in Pakistan, it's extraordinary. They've got bowlers coming out of every part of the stadium. It's incredible. So I do think it's a level playing field. India have got to be a top team to say, well, you know, they're going to get very close. India, West Indies, Pakistan. I wouldn't put Australia as a top favourite team, not in my book.
No, I think, and I think they're conscious of that. I think they've been given a rude shock, haven't they? Particularly in the 5-day game with what happened against India last time out. Alan, we could sit here a natural day long, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. It's funny, I just put you on the spot there, and you know, whenever I'm doing football, I always get asked to predict stuff, and I don't always like doing it because I just enjoy seeing what happens and then analysing it and chatting it and talking about it. It's amazing to think that amount of time has flown by since the days when you and I would sit in that office you mentioned at the start of our chat, or in the green room or the dressing room or the makeup room and everything like that. But it's lovely that we can sit and do this, isn't it? Because it's great that we're still doing what we do.
Well, it is. I mean, it's a part of life, isn't it? Yes, it's our work, it's a job, but it's wonderful. You know, I've got great friends like yourself. We've been going many years. I will say, well, you've got some obviously some good climate there in Singapore. You're looking great there, John. You know, when we did go off in, we did this in our ESPN Star Sports years. I mean, you had some of the best. I mean, I remember when Bobby Robson, do you remember dear Bobby Robson?
Oh,
he came to Singapore. What a joy. I could have sat there. I would have paid to have sat in the studio with you, watching and listening to you talking to Bobby Robson. Steve McMahon, you had Steve as a regular guest. And you see, you specialize in football, and John, we watched you here. I watched you in Premier League productions, and you had all those great guests. And I agree, and it's a specialist subject. I think you get into it. Gosh, we miss you, John. We miss you.
Well, you know what? I really appreciate that, and I think the most important thing is, we do what we love doing, and I think we've been blessed, haven't we? Really, that we've had a chance to do it. And what's lovely for me is I watch cricket these days as a fan. I watch it as someone who sits at home, and occasionally I'll sort of remember the days when I rubbed shoulders with so-and-so, or when I went out for a drink in Kuala Lumpur with the Australian team when they were passing through, and with Shane Warne around. That was always a lot of fun, and those are lovely little memories. But for cricket, for me, it's like a hobby. So having a chance to pick your brains has been brilliant today, Alan. I will let you get away, but let's do something again. This has been a lot of fun. Let's see what the viewers and the fans out there say, and if they think we should get together and do something, maybe we can.
I hope we get back together. And who knows, John, maybe you and I can get back together and do a show. Maybe we should do more of these. I would love that.
Brilliant stuff. Alan, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Keep well, my friend, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks, John.